Pertemuan ini adalah pertemuan yang sangat menyenangkan dan menggembirakan. Saya yang mewakili masyarakat transportasi Indonesia diajak oleh Ketua FSTPT dan yang lebih berbahagia lagi kami difasilitasi, dihandle langsung oleh ASEAN Development Bank. Terima kasih Pak Bambang Susantono. Sebagai masyarakat Indonesia, kami sangat berharap ke depan bahwa persoalan pandemik ini adalah bukan persoalan yang membuat kita pasrah, yang membuat kita berputus asa, tetapi mari kita memberikan advokasi, edukasi, sosialisasi, pembelajaran kepada publik, khususnya masyarakat transportasi Indonesia, untuk selalu hidup sehat, untuk selalu patuh dengan aturan-aturan kesehatan. Mari kita kedepankan nilai manusia dan kemanusiaan untuk produksi ekonomi yang lebih baik. Terima kasih. Semoga acara webinar Zoom meeting ini berjalan dengan baik. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Salam MTI.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you again for the very warm welcome, Professor Agus. And now to set the stage, we are very keen to hear a keynote presentation from Dr. Bambang Susantono, the Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development of ADB. Dr. Susantono, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shai. I hope that my audio and video is clear. So my colleagues, Professor Agus Taufik Mulyono, and my other colleagues, Dr. Isran, and all the participants of this webinar, a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your occasions. It is a great pleasure for me to be here to virtually also welcome all of you from all over the world if you are joining us to this webinar. I thank for the Indonesian Transport Society and the Inter-University Network for Transport Studies for co-organizing this timely event. As we all know, transport plays a vital role in development. It ensures the functioning of economic activities and social well-being and maintaining the interconnectedness of society. Transport ensures everyday mobility of people and goods, allowing people easy access to education, to employment, to health and social opportunities, and plays a crucial role in the production and distribution of goods. However, the questions remain on how countries are meeting their growing transport needs, given the enormous growth in their economies. In our report meeting Asia Infrastructure Needs, ADB calculated that for each year between 2016 and 2030, around $1.7 trillion is needed to be invested in infrastructure in Asia in order to maintain its growth momentum, tackle poverty, and also to respond to climate change. From this, about $600 billion is required for the transport sector. The report also identified the increasing need to maintain existing assets and improve operation and transport system efficiency. So while the transport brings many benefits, it also causes several negative impacts, as we know. First is the severe congestions felt by many Asian cities. The congestion is estimated to cost as high as 6% of the national GDP. Second, air pollution in our cities is primarily associated with traffic. Of the world's 100 most polluted cities, 99 are in Asia. These cities are battling with the worst air quality. Third, Asia accounts for the highest number of road fatalities, as well as the fastest growing rate. And of course, there are emissions from motor vehicles in the form of greenhouse gases, which contribute to climate change. So while the Asia-Pacific region continues to build and improve its transport systems and operations, the negative costs must be addressed, not only by governments, but also by all segments of society to sustain growth in the transportation sector. Transport is a major part of ADB operations. We see this as an integral driver of change, as transport play in enabling economic development and poverty reductions. We are focused on promoting and supporting sustainable transport in key areas of emerging needs in the regions, such as urban transport, particularly on public transport system, non-motorized transport, integrated urban transport planning, demand management and traffic management, transport and climate change, guided by the country and regional level conceptual tool of avoid, shape, and improve, as we know ASI, logistic and cross-border transport, and road safety and social sustainability, where ADB will increase the scale, quality, durations, and continuity of its support for road safety. For the last 4 decades, ADB support to the transport sector of our developing member countries accounted for nearly 30% of our lending portfolio. For our current pipeline, 2020 to 2022, the transport sector assistance is over $5 billion per year. I want to highlight 2 important considerations in ADB project that positively impact our transport sector. First is in the area of climate change. ADB has committed $80 billion from its own resources for climate finance until 2030. Our work to support CO2 reductions in transport sector is done through increased financing for more energy efficient modes such as rail and public transport. The transport sector will also add to the climate adaptations commitment. Our work in adaptation is essential as many of our road and rail improvement projects need additional drainage structures to cater to higher rainfall levels. Also, coastal roads, such as many of our project support in the Pacific, need to be raised and protected against storm surges. The second area is gender considerations. ADB recognizes that gender equality and women empowerment are essential for inclusive and sustainable development. Our transport operation has strong gender targets. 5 completed transport projects with gender mainstreaming element successfully implemented gender-focused components, helping to reduce women time poverty and enhance their mobility in urban and rural area. Most of these projects also provided women with income-generating opportunities. So now let me show you some of ADB project representative of these key areas. ADB has always promoted sustainable form of urban transport and will use our experience to scale up our assistance in this area. One such example is our support to Bangkok mass transit system in Thailand. It is a $311 million loan through a public-private partnership net cost scheme, in which the MRT Authority of Thailand is responsible for the provision of land and right-of-way, and meanwhile, the private sector invests in civil works, mechanical and equipment system, and rolling stock, as well as operation and maintenance services. Another example is the $500 million bus rapid transit system in Karachi, Pakistan, which is co-financed with the French government, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the Global Climate Fund. This BRT route will serve as a major corridor in the very congested city with limited formal public transport services. The $2.7 billion ManilaClark Railway project in the Philippines is another example of our growing support to the rail subsector. This is by far the largest single infrastructure investment made by ADB and hopes to provide rail services to Manila densely populated area. As the railway will connect Manila to Clark, which is the newly developed regional growth center in the country, it will also play a key role in promoting a shift of population growth and spur economic growth along the entire corridor. Another example is the Apia Port project in Samoa, Pacific. The proposed port improvement will provide the needed protections from natural hazards by upgrading the terminal infrastructure, strengthening existing breakwater, and constructing improved custom facility. Another area that ADB gives focus is in knowledge. In the transport sector, ADB has published several strategy papers, guidance notes, and technical papers, all aimed to provide a common framework. You can download it for free from ADB website, www.adb.org. And most recently, ADB published the guidance notes on COVID-19 and transport in Asia and the Pacific. The note highlights recovery strategy for each subsector, which I will talk more about later. Now, I would like to touch upon one big question that is frequently asked in discussions about transport today. What will be in the next new normal? As we have seen worldwide, transport has been hit hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic and is now finding itself in a totally unprecedented situations. Urban transport has seen a return to some form of normality. However, ridership is still significantly down for public transport, while there is increased usage of private modes of transport. Air travel is still operating, but at dramatically reduced level of services since most cross-country travels have been restricted, and there is minimal demand from travelers. However, we see urban freight is up, driven by the expansion of e-commerce and delivery services. A changed transport industry will have far-reaching implications. In all ADB member countries, gross value added of transport sector is estimated to be approximately $2.7 trillion. The sector also directly employs around 157 million people, including 16 million women. The travel restrictions and reluctance to return to public transport have also affected the large number of people employed in this sector, as high as 17% in many member countries. A large and sustained support, especially for the many small and medium-sized enterprises affected by the containment measure, is needed. So in facing the new normal and implementing the bounce back strategy after lockdown, it is important to restore confidence in sustainable transport system. Response must be planned for contingency, but never forget the value of shared transit in the process of economic development. We should remember that COVID-19 has shown us that we can respond to challenges at a scale we have never seen before, and consider how to make changes to move to a more resilient state while we have the opportunity. This is imperative, or our cities will suffer even greater level of congestions, poor air quality, and road crashes. In response to the current and new challenges, ADB is currently working on several knowledge works. One of these is the Asian Transport Outlook, ATO. The ATO is designed to strengthen the knowledge base on transport in Asia and the Pacific regions to create an institutionalized process for data and information collections, analysis, and documentations. Aside from supporting the planning and delivery of ADB transport sector assistance, it also aims to support government in transport policy development, support policy dialogue in the implementation of SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and other relevant agreements on sustainable development, support other organizations in planning and delivering sustainable transport assistance, and enable research on the transport sectors in the regions. Currently, ADB are also undertaking research on the future of transport through a foresight study. It is designed to drive long-term thinking on the future of transport and shape ADB support to our clients. It will examine trends facing our society and assess the implications of this on the sector, from where we will develop suitable transfer visions and principles that will drive strategic processes and specific of future transport support. In addition to the foresight study, ADB is also running 3 technical innovation challenges in the transport sector. The challenge is open to all and seeks to crowdsource ideas and solutions to the current and future problem. The purpose of the challenge is for participants to submit original contributions or projects that meet the requirement. Winners will have the opportunity to implement the solutions with ADB. There are currently 3 challenges. The first is driving safe transportations using digital solutions, which aim to find long-term digital solutions that can help citizens plan and coordinate their travel and use public transportation safely and effectively. Second is on enhancing health and hygiene for public transport. That focuses on the piloting technology, which improves the health and hygiene of public transport for users. And third, enhancing safety and security for public transport, aims to pilot technology which improves the safety of public transport for all users. The innovative solutions identified in the challenges can be used to help our member countries gear up toward the new normal in transport. We can use these solutions to assist governments, provide citizen digital transport information, coordinations, and update it for a safe, accessible, and efficient transport system. So, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, I want to close my presentations by noting that a new normal is emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, but this is a dynamic conditions where the next normal will always be coming in the future. The fusion of advanced digital technology and transportations has created the opportunity to deliver transport services that outstrip our predecessors in efficiency, safety, and sustainability. So let me close by emphasizing that collaborations among stakeholders have played and will continue to play a very important role in shifting to this new normal. We must be agile and creative in these challenging situations so that the transport sector can rebound back to its track, redress all the unsolved and current problems, and be resilient in ensuring future challenges ahead. I thank to all of your attentions, and I wish you all a lively and fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susantono, for setting the stage for all of us. And of course, we would like to hear from all the participants. So if you have any questions, please do type your questions on the chat box in Zoom or in YouTube. And the moderator will bring these questions during the discussion. So with the backdrop has set, let's us move on to the first session titled Mobility in Landlocked Country, the Case of Bhutan. May I invite the moderator for the session, Dr. Andika Kusuma. Over to you, Dr. Andika.
Thank you, Pak Chai. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to send my regards to Pak Bambang Susantono for it's quite good for his speech, for direct us to discussion, Pak Isran, Dr. Isran Ramli, and then Prof. Agus Taufik Mulyono, who has delivered the speech. Okay, I would like to give some short introduction about what the first section is talking about, the mobility of in Bhutan, which is a landlocked country, one of a landlocked country in the Asian region. So at this time, we have to discuss about the resilience, the agility during the pandemic, and then as Pak Bambang already said, we have to rebound and then keep the transportation back on the track, and then for the next or the future normal. So I would like to invite Dr. Kanopan Laup Araya, who is a country director for Bhutan from ADB. His familiar name is Jam. And then there are two discussions, Dr. Eng Puspita Dirgahayani, or we call it Pak Pipit, from Institute of Technology Bandung. And then the second discussion is Dr. Kandidat Probo Hardini, lecturer from Universitas Jenderal Sudirman. So the first session, I would like to give Dr. Kau Lauprayan or Jem to have 15 minutes to deliver her presentation, and then following with the discussion. Times and place is yours, Jem.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants. I'm just dive right in. Thank you very much for opportunity to allow me to be part of this important webinar. As introduced before, I'm country director of Bhutan Resident Mission. I'm going to share experience in Bhutan, and it is so poignant because, in fact, you know, it's quite immobility right now, and we miss it so much. I'm joining you actually from where I'm quarantined here in Paro, Bhutan. So next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce you to Kingdom of Bhutan. Bhutan is a small landlocked country located in between India and People Republic of China. It is a very small landlocked country with a population of a little bit over 700,000, scattered over 20 districts. The size itself is about 50 times smaller than Indonesia. It is well known for its development philosophy, gross national happiness. And with that, the country so far has emitted negative carbon. The GDP is 2.5 billion, and when that translates into per capita is 3,382 US dollars per capita, and it has narrow economic base with relying on hydropower and special kind of tourism, which is high income, low impact. Next slide, please. This is a very important time stage of Bhutan. It is the time of transformation. The country has achieved so much over the past 3 decades with high growth and achievement in social development. I won't go into detail. You can see in the slide. This is because it's a very typical story, because the low-hanging fruit has already been achieved easily, but going forward, it is very important for the country to embark the reforms and investment, given a lot of challenge that the country is facing. You saw earlier slide that in fact the per capita GDP is not that low. It's by the number itself is considered to be middle income country, but because it's very challenging, the country has high risk of vulnerability. The next slide, please, show you the challenges that the country face. Being a small country, so it cannot be benefit from economy of scale, so everything is small, limited number of economic players, so the state is dominant in economic activity, so that as a result, private sector is very small and in the nascent stage. And the geographic setting of Bhutan is also very challenging. It is also susceptible for all the natural disaster. And we also have an issue of disparity and a lot of different vulnerable groups, including youth, women, and poor people in urban and in urban and rural area. Next slide, please. When we come to transportation in Bhutan, given the rugged area is very difficult and there's no rail, on the land transportation is dominated by road transport. In air transport, where I am in right now, it's in Paro. You see in the left, in the western side of the country. This is the international airport. And we have 3 other domestic airports in Bumthang, Sapang, and Tachigang. And ADB is very active in supporting enhancement and investment in these airports. In terms of urban area, urban transport, Bhutan has quite high urbanization rate, about 40%. Even though it is now a negative carbon emission, this is the area where in future the country may face, may move into, this is the weak areas that the country can emit more carbon dioxide if it's not planned well. And in terms of trade, because the country has very limited border trade, in the north of the country, there's no open border trade border. Only in the south we have 4 area, but almost 80% of the trade are concentrated in Punchaling, in the Chuka, in the just right down south of Paro. Okay, next, please. I'll just go quickly. I won't dwell too deeply on gross national happiness, but I just would like to emphasize that because the country adhere to the philosophy of gross national happiness, so in a developing country national plan, the government has applied this philosophy in planning. It followed the 4 pillars of gross national happiness. And next slide, please. It's also this later on, even though the gross national happiness has introduced in earlier as 1970s, but only recently in 2008 that it was evolved into more detail. It has 9 domain and 33 indicators, and household survey every 2 years would track this index to see the progress of the gross national happiness. And it is used to guide Bhutan's development. Next, please. And concrete example is the government has used the gross national happiness idea in transport planning. For example, the Bhutan transport vision of 2040 also incorporate various ideas to enhance accessibility. For example, accessibility and activity to provide supply for people, and include topics such as safety on road and efficient use of economic resource. These in terms of preparing any investment in transportation, the government has make sure that environmental impact assessment has been prepared well, and government also introduced green tax on vehicle for the vehicle that rely on fossil fuel, and provide subsidy and tax exempt for electric cars and taxi. Next, please. So now I'll discuss about a link to our Vice President Bang Bang on the pandemic. Now Bhutan is right in the middle of pandemic. It is one of the countries in Asia that introduced very strict response. We in the phase 1 of the pandemic, if you recall from VP slide, there are 3 phases. Response, and then reaction, and then adaptation. On phase 1, since the beginning, when the first case was discovered in early March, the government has sealed the border, international border. In fact, even up to today, no foreign tourists can be allowed to the country. Sorry, up until early October. And there was a little bit of yo-yo. Then at the end of March, there was an issue of work from home, and and then the government opened again. But then there was a case happening, and then that's a national lockdown also was introduced in August. So that is phase 1 of response that the government has taken, which is very strict. Next, please. And during this response period, government also applied the gross national happiness in response to COVID pandemic. One thing that's very unique that I like to emphasize here is the use of volunteer, because the country has very limited resources, and they are among various domain of gross national happiness is about volunteerism. So there are a lot of civil volunteer, local language they call desu, and these are people who can take leave from their normal job to take turns and to help arrange and organize all of the logistic to make sure that the protocol of COVID response has been complied with. Next, please. Now on the recovery, which is where we are at the stage that we are in right now, and about to move on to the next one. The government has easing the lockdown from the 1st of September, and start to open up the signing of agreement for air travel bubble has been arranged with the government of India. but that's just open up in early October, and some flight will start, but not too regularly. And all of the COVID health protocols still have to be.
Enggak ke Forlap, kan Forlap di itu kan ada pencarian data.
Can I have next slide, please? And similar to the last phase, GNS philosophy always incorporated during this phase. For example, the COVID safety protocol has been incorporated with social distancing, with, for example, 50% capacity of public transportation, such as buses and taxi are used. Next, please. On the last phase of pandemic, which is where we are just embarking on, the government has reopened the strategy to focus toward reviving the economy. There are three sectors, and these are the sector actually was most affected during the pandemic: tourism, agriculture, and construction. For tourism, during the downtime right now, where there's no tourists, so the reskilling and upskilling and maintenance of public transportation, tourism infrastructure has been going on. And in terms of agriculture, as you see that the country it's landlocked and very the connectivity to outside market is very limited. So agriculture sector had to step up and boost the food production. And some reforms in this sector has been going on. And construction, the government has preparing the plan to make sure that the country would bounce back to sustainable recovery. And last slide, please. So this summarize of ADB assistance to Bhutan related to COVID, including technical assistance and grant that we provide to procure medical supply and equipment for the country. And we also provide $20 million concessional loan to help government, to support government effort in providing economic relief to displaced people and affected people. But moving forward, given that we have a lot of international experience, we will support government in planning ahead in recovery strategy, as well as if they continue supporting on the budgetary support for reforms in terms of public sector management and financial sector, which is a key channel that the government channel or the economic relief to displaced people and vulnerable groups. So let me stop here and open for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jem. I will have some points from before I give the floors to discussion Dr. Rahayu and then Dr. Candidate Probo Hardini. So Bhutan is, as I mentioned, landlocked country, and they have the interesting things then from what we learned from Bhutan, who have a similar problem. I think every nation in this world faced a similar problem in managing the COVID-19 and how to learn and how to survive. But Bhutan promotes some new perspective in measuring their recovery by introducing the Gross National Happiness Index, which is a new perspective. And then we would like to have a point of view from Dr. Rahayu and then Puspita Rahayu and then Dr. Probo. So I would like to give the floor to Dr. Pipit to have some thought on what we have get some information from Bhutan perspective, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mas Andika. Thank you also, Ms. Jum, for your insightful presentation. Good afternoon, Pak Bambang Susantono, Pak Isran Ramli, Pak Professor ATM, speakers, discussants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm assured that Bhutan is a unique country. I think there is no simple way to bridge Bhutan's situation with Indonesia's, since it is a landlocked country and also a small one. However, from the presentation, it seems that similar issue of the increase of urbanization rate also occurs in Bhutan. So allow me to discuss in the context of urban mobility, especially road transport, which is the dominant mode of transport in Bhutan and also in Indonesia. Bhutan is a happy country. I think it's a path that was intentionally created by adopting Gross National Happiness Index, and it is indeed interesting. What has come across my mind is, yes? Okay. What has come across my mind is how transport contributes to the concept of happiness or well-being. Perhaps we are all agree that transportation allows people to reach activity places in which people satisfy basic needs. So a lack of mobility, what's happening now, may jeopardize people's happiness. What is debatable is that whether higher or lower mobility results in more happiness. I believe that it depends on the impact of mobility, or perhaps the quality of mobility itself, regardless it is low or high. Of course, the nature would be different between utilitarian mobility or the mobility to access productive activities such as working, school, etc., and with recreational mobility. In this digital era, I think also catalyzed by the pandemic, is more likely to change the behavior of mobility. Not all activities require us to travel. Thus, low mobility can also result in happiness. But when we do need to travel, the perceived quality of mobility will be more essential in the future. Not only seamless, but more importantly now, safe. And learning from this pandemic, safe is not only relates to accident risk, which of course still an issue, but added by the health risk. It makes a new indicator or metric to measure safe mobility and adds a greater degree of complexity in delivering one. Considering that, we cannot close our eyes that mobility, as also mentioned by Pak Bambang, using private modes or other forms of micromobility will be more preferable. Public transport will be less preferable. And this is a challenge to answer, I think. We can do it old school, but there are some modifications required. Multimodal integration, especially with non-motorized transport and other micro-mobility modes, perhaps can be an incentive to use public transportation. And more importantly, urban regeneration is part of this attempt, meaning more public spaces, open spaces, and shared streets. Modernization, automation, electrification, and also integration with mobility services are also keys. As mentioned by Jem in the last point, I agree that institutional or governance reform is required. Of course, we cannot forget about local wisdom and tourism context, inclusiveness, and also, I think this is a good keyword now, agile, need to be put into consideration. And finally, returning back to the high probability of increased private mode use, we still need to do something. From what I read, maybe Ms. Jim later can correct me if I'm wrong, that in Bhutan, the increase of vehicle ownership almost doubled, and so did the energy consumption in transport sector. Urban traffic congestion also has become an issue. And the increase in vehicle numbers, a lack of control over vehicle emissions, and low quality fuels have all contributed to an increase in Bhutan's GHG emissions. I think it's an apple-to-apple comparison to Indonesia as well. And to tackle this, I also heard that the government aimed to introduce electric vehicles, especially in Thimphu. And
your microphone is mute.
The microphone is, we
Sorry,
lost your sound, Bu.
Mute, Dr. Puspita.
Bu
Yeah, now it's on.
Puspita.
hello?
Yeah, now you are on. Please, can you please
Yeah,
repeat your
yeah.
last 5 seconds?
Last 5 seconds. Okay. What I heard is that maybe later, Ms. Jung can correct me, that the government aimed to transform Thimphu into the first electric city in the world and reduce fuel imports by 70% by this year, 2020. I'm not sure whether this target has been achieved or not, but the main idea is because the country depends on private transport, one way to address air pollution and reduce GHG emission is to change the fuel and to promote electric vehicles, among others, of course. A related policy in this matter has been put in place in Indonesia to promote penetration of EVs. In my humble opinion, the direction is worthwhile to consider to get back on track towards sustainable urban mobility instead of moving backward. To pursue what's so-called 3R, as mentioned by Pak Bambang, rebound, regress, and resilient. However, there are many aspects to accelerate this in terms of policies, fiscal instruments, and so on and so forth. And probably that was my points of discussions. Hope you can get through this pandemic and stay safe, healthy, and happy. Thank you for the opportunity once again.
Thank you, Dr. Puspita. Now we can have, or do you want to answer it directly, or any thought, comments from you, Jem?
Yes, if you allow me.
Yes, please.
I agree with Dr. Puspita completely. She summarized and have some observation. It's very insightful. Yeah, first of all, on the transport itself, it's very important part of for the population to achieve greater happiness. Yes, Bhutan is a gross national happiness country, but we are well aware that it's not the most happy country. That's always be misunderstood. It's still a poor country. At the end of the day, the very bare minimum of having foundations such as good infrastructure connectivity is very important, as Dr. Puspita mentioned, because it's a mean for many economic activity in life. It's a means for people to do to have to go to work, to access to market and other opportunity. So yes, it's not about quantity. A lot of time it's about quality, like you said, and the network itself is quite extensive, but given the hard terrain, all weather road is also very challenging because the country is very disaster prone. When the monsoon season comes, there's a lot of landslide and so on. So a lot of planned technology that has to be incorporated in order to make sure that whatever the network has, it has to be functioning all the time and people can have access, because when emergency happens, such as when people have to go to the hospital or health care center, they would be able to without being impeded by the blockage of the transportation network, for example. And yes, on the urban is a very important area. As I mentioned, this is the weakness in Bhutan. As much as everybody here is very proud to be negative carbon sink country, up to now, this is the area where it can turn completely, that the country can emit more carbon dioxide, or the fact that Dr. Puspita mentioned it's very alarming, and it's true that number of vehicles high and everything. Government has been thinking about introducing EV for a long time, but these things cannot happen on and off its own. They're trying to do it before, even last 5-year plan, but EVs, it depends on the technology. It's very expensive, right? Compared to normal at that stage, at least 5 years ago. It's so expensive. Each vehicle costs much more. And on top of that, there are other plans that we have to plan ahead. And it didn't really happen at the time because the charging station has to go hand in hand. You want to introduce EV, but then if all the overall plan doesn't plan out EVs, charger, and people don't feel, even they have money to buy, and then it's inconvenient because, what about if the people want to use it across the district in the hilly terrain, and will there be enough charging station? Whereas, old-fashioned fossil fuel, it just seems like it has been there for a long time. So it's more convenient, it's cheaper. So many, plus points. So it's really very difficult. So the government has introduced and has that plan. But as per your question, that's very ambitious target. We haven't got to that yet, to have 70% of vehicle to be EV in Bhutan, in Thimphu, although the number is high. And in the Bhutan case, it makes sense. As I showed in the beginning, the country is actually produce a lot of energy for export. So it makes sense that in Bhutan, Bhutan produces its own clean energy. So if, the vehicle can have access to cheap electric energy from within, no need to import. But at the same time, catch 22 here, because the country have hydropower, but it's try to not hurt the environment. So far, we use the run of the river hydropower. So that means it doesn't store and doesn't have like big reservoir. So during the dry season, the country cannot produce so much. So it still have to import from India. So this thing has to, be considered, and when we make comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jem. So we can continue to the second discussion. Dr. Candidate Probo Hardini, times and place is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mas Andika. Thank you, Pak Bambang, Pak ATM, Pak Isran, and thank you, Jem, for the great presentation. So it is very interesting for knowing how Bhutan adopts a very unique philosophy. It puts gross national happiness as more important than gross domestic product that is quite different from many countries across the world. So learning from transport planning that laid as a guidance in transport development in an area, so we can see how government or city authority create their own their transport planning. Most of transport planning process here in Indonesia concerned with the predict and provide approach, counting the statistical data and its projection in the future, trajectory of the data, and thinking how to provide transport needs in the future. And the planning process usually neglects the thought on how the transport profession support people life quality through their. The transport can be put as an essential factor that values the happiness. It is an essential information whether Bhutan has already taken into account some consideration regarding the happiness. This includes how transport creates happiness to people for its provision, and how happy people with the movement they can make, how happy people for their transport infrastructure service they get. Learning from many cities in their transport development stories on road provision, mode provision, basically considered to the how transport can serve the mobility and grow up a particular area. The transport development is emphasized on economic growth or political interest or even military interest. So it is quite controversial if I'm saying that there's no people happiness consideration in planning process. But I think that's the fact. Transport planning is done by physical consideration, so it doesn't touch the balancing between spiritual and economic development, for an example. Even though we move towards sustainable issues in transport development, which is fantastic. And now during the pandemic, people is pushed to mostly stay at home. And of course, it reduces the transport activities. And we do know psychologically when people is banned to go out, so it will connect with the happiness they have. Here, how does Bhutan cope the condition will be great to be explained. And taking the transport health protocol and transport bubble in Bhutan, can it give impact in related with number of passengers that in turn plays a big role in Bhutan economic? Regarding that, tourism sector is freeze or down in Bhutan. What I'm thinking is, in the post-pandemic, the transport development policies will more take into account non-physical consideration. And through this, will the transport provision be better as it will more consider safety and health aspects? When the government may start to think in multidisciplinary perspective, transport is provided as an integrated consideration both in physical and non-physical aspects, including how happy transport user to travel from one to another places safely and convenient. In this context, we can learn from Bhutan. So here, happiness can help to keep the good immune in one side. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Probo Hardini. Can you have any thought or comments on this from Probo comments, Jem, please?
Thank you. The connection is not very clear, but I would try to answer or react to the observation as best I can. And thank you very much. Yeah, I would just say that the gross national happiness in Bhutan in transportation planning, it has been that I present, has been adopted in terms of planning and it's also adapt during the pandemic by using the domain in the 9 domain of gross national happiness that involve volunteers. So that is unique about Bhutan. But the happiness is it's very qualitative, and I just want to share something as a reaction that sometimes happiness is not about having more. And as I can understand this very personally because I'm also Buddhist, I'm from Thailand, and Bhutanese also they are believe in Buddhism philosophy in terms of contentment. Sometimes when happiness is about being content, but in the new era, of course, it's very difficult when you open up and you see how the opportunity, and it's difficult to not compare. So it's just about balance of how you can make people content and make people safe. And I like what Dr. Pushpita mentioned earlier, that now we are going beyond just, we always in the past obsessed about safety in terms of physical safety, right, accident and so on. But now we are talking about health, that it has to be hygienic and so on. And in urban area, the government has to make sure that people are happy in terms of receive quality public service in terms of frequent and bus services and clean and on time and things like that is what we have to focus going forward. Thank you. I hope I answered because I could not really hear super clearly.
Okay, thank you, Jem. So before I sum, there is one interesting question from in the chat box, Jim, about the logistic, particularly in Bhutan. We know that you mentioned about the agriculture. When interesting that after the tourism, the agriculture becomes the second economic driven nowadays in Bhutan. And then the question is about how Bhutan, we understand from from YouTube or any other information that Bhutan is like a hilly area and a mountainous, and that how do you clustering the logistic? How the Bhutan clustering the logistic in terms of if we related managing the logistic in terms of to make the economics to distribute the things from the let's say from the agriculture to the area to the people. Yeah.
Thank you. In transport, that's for the fruit and vegetable. There are promotion of localized more production in different areas, so there's less of transport time, and also introduction of coal storage and so on. But all in all, it's also introduced increase of value, agriculture value addition in terms of transfer, food process. But I also would like to take this opportunity to answer a question, I think from the chat box about tourism. Yes, tourism is very important, but because medical facility here is very limited, government took a very, very brave and very painful measure, because after weighing the benefit and the cost, they know that allowing the number of tourists as it like a normal time, it cannot handle. Even in South Asia, only 2 countries that has already reopened their tourist sector, but not Bhutan. Maldives and Sri Lanka has starting to reopening tourism. Bhutan just in the beginning because of the constraint, as I mentioned, the facility and remoteness and everything. If we need to evacuate, medevac anyone, it has to be daytime medevac. You know that airplane coming to Bhutan, all the pilot that can fly into Bhutan, there are only a handful of pilots in the world. They do not use computer. They have to use the manual and fly only in daylight. So that is a constraint that we have. And tourists, yes, we rely on tourists a lot, but hydropower is still a main staple of the country. It contributes to 25-30% of GDP. And this year, the country just have a new commission and have more capacity of producing, and they still get income from that. So in the sense, this is a buffer for Bhutan. Thank you.
Okay, I think, yes, thank you, Jim. There is one question. I think we can have 3 minutes before I end up about the restriction on having how the supply chains comes, because Bhutan is a landlocked country. From Edwin Arif.
Okay. Okay, I saw that question from Edwin. He wondering
from Edwin.
When there is any travel restriction reduction by host country. You mean Bhutan? Yes, we right now there's no visa issue to any tourist. And in fact, any our operation in ADB, we don't even have our colleagues allowed to come to the country. So only when we manage our this year operation is done by local staff and I myself who's based here. But yeah, no allowance of tourists, foreign tourists. And yes, this have a big impact on government revenue. But like I said, there's also hydropower income, and they take this slow time to clean up the infrastructure, prepare for the next season. Hopefully next year it will be open.
Okay, thank you, Jeb. So
quickly,
please allow
because,
me to sum up. And yeah.
Just quickly, I think I missed the last
Yes,
question
please.
by Edwin, like supply chain need. Bhutan has very close relationship with India, so a lot of import trade happen with India, and with good relationship, there's an agreement for the necessity goods coming from India. But in terms of like medical supply and so on, it's gone through Thailand. It's more regular. Every week there is a weekly flight from Bhutan to Thailand to pick up medical supply and our necessities by air. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jem, Mbak Pipit, Mbak Dini. I would like to sum up all of the discussion from three of you, the thoughts that comes up there about the mobility in very related to transport, and that we have as the stakeholders should support by comes to traveling for that comes to productivity related to economics and holidays. We have to be in the future, the transport will be not only integrate, but should be seamless, safe, and hygiene. And it should be efficient. And then from that now on in the future, we expect it can to the nation or to the country to rerun the economics. So that's all from my side. Then thank you very much once again to Jem, Pipit, Dini for your kind thoughts in this session. And then I would like to send back to this opportunity, this time to Pak Chai. Oh yeah, before that, I would like for those who would like to have a e-certificate, the certificate will be posted through your email. So please, I will share the link for the registration today, and then because the certificates come from the FSTPT and then the Masyarakat Transportasi Indonesia. Thank you very much, Pak Chai. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andika, Jem, Ibu Pipit, and Ibu Probo for the very interesting first session. I hope you all just like me that I learned a lot of things from only the first session. Let's take a very quick break of 3 minutes or so before we move on to the next discussion. And I would like to just screen this video as a timekeeper. So let's take a break and stretch yourself, stand up and take a deep breath, and let's continue this discussion after this, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Chai. Thank you.
Thank you.
that concludes our 3-minute break. So welcome back again to the second session of a very interesting discussion. And our next session will be the mobility in sea-lock country, the case of Fiji. Without further ado, may I invite the moderator for this session, Dr. Haryadilon. Coco, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Chai. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and very warm welcome. Welcome back to the second session. My name is Coco, and this is my honor and pleasure to be moderating this next session about sea-lock mobility in the sea-lock countries, and that's and really the organized for the benefit of Indonesian policymakers, so that they can learn from peers. We have peer countries, in this case, Fiji and the Pacific Islands, which the geography resembles some of our archipelagic provinces. So this is really a rare learning opportunity. And as a Secretary General of the Indonesian Transportation Society, I'm glad to have this opportunity to collaborate with FSTPT and also with the Asian Development Bank. As we all know, and Pak Bambang reiterated that this pandemic is hitting the economy, but it's hitting tourism, air travel, as well as logistics, especially hard. So, and this is really a challenge for all of us. Not only in development, but especially in the transportation sector. And also, many countries are trying to get out of this problem, trying to solve this problem. And I think it's really worth our while to be talking to each other, to have this discussion, so that we can probably learn from each other and how we can get out of this pandemic, and see ourselves in the next normal. Without further ado, we do have our speakers here. It's a rare opportunity to be hearing from the original director of ADB from Fiji. Do I have you, Mr. Masayuki Tachi, or Masa?
Yes, yep.
Okay. And then also I would like to introduce Professor Erika Bukhari, who is a professor in civil engineering at the Sriwijaya University in Palembang, South Sumatra. Prof. Erika, welcome.
Yes, hello, Mas Coco.
Okay. And last but not least is, Mas Ibrahim, who's also a frequent co-author of mine. I'm very lucky to, to be able to collaborate with him as well. And he's the chief economist at Samudra Indonesia, a logistic company. And he is also the chair of our Indonesian Transport Society Forum on Logistics. And also, I would like to iterate that on the chat box, please fill in the sign for the e-certificates for those who wish to have one, and the certificate will be issued jointly by MTI and FSTPT. And also, please type in your question in the chat box, and I'm happy to read it out for you after the discussion. So, without further ado, Masa, the floor is yours, please. 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and assalamualaikum. My name is Masayuki Tajiri. I'm a regional director of the ADB's Pacific office. So I'm located in Fiji. Next slide, please. So I will start from the brief introduction of Fiji. So Fiji is a remote archipelago in the South Pacific. As you can see in the map, it's in the middle of the ocean, the 3,000 kilometers from Australia. That is the major market for Fiji. The Fiji has more than 330 islands, and among which 110 permanently inhabited. As the moderator pointed out, this geography is quite similar to some of the regions of Indonesia. Well, of course, it's in much smaller scale. So I think that there are some relevance and the lessons learned each other. Fiji have 900,000 people, and 70% live in 3 islands, largest islands in Fiji, Viti Levu, Vanua Levu, Taveuni. So it's less than the 1 million people. It's probably slightly bigger than the Bhutan, which is in the first session, but it's very small as a nation. I just checked the population of Bali, that's the one island tourism oriented, that has a population of 4 million. So actually Fiji is like a 1/4 of Bali, and it's became the independent country. So that is you can imagine what's the size of the country. GDP is $5.5 billion, and the GDP per capita is $6,000 per person. So it's not really poor country. It's reasonably doing okay, but it really depends on the tourism. So the business persons and the hospitality industries related with tourism, they are quite affluent. But if we go to the village and the rural area, it's very basic still. And also the economic nature is very narrow economic base. So it's really depends on the tourism and also the niche export products. You may probably know the Fiji water. Hollywood celebrities drinking this Fiji water. That is the biggest export of Fiji. So you can imagine that's what's the economy structure. There is no sizable manufacturing. There is no major products. So it's really depends on the small export products and also the tourism. Next slide, please. So we can talk about the transport in Fiji. Obviously, Fiji is a sea-locked country, so air and maritime transports are important compared with the land transport. For the international transport, economy depends on the imported goods, even for the basic foods. And also it depends on the international tourism. Tourism is very important, as I said, and because the population is very small, the local market for tourism is very small. So it really depends on the foreigners who come to the Fiji for tourism. And for the domestic, it's also important the air and the maritime transport, because as I said, we have 110 inhabited islands. They need to be connected by air or by sea. So that's air and the maritime transport is predominantly important. In the next slides, I'll talk more a bit about the air and the maritime transport, but let me quickly touch upon the land transport. For the land transport, 30% of roads paved, it's not very high, and limited rail services. So we do have small cargo rail for the sugar industry, but that is not really for the passengers, it's very limited. So most of the transport, in particular urban area, is the bus. So 70% is a bus, it's a public transport, and the others 20% car, 8% taxi. So and also for the cargo in the land, it's mostly truck. So that is quite a basic land transport in Fiji. Next slide, please. So we will see air transport in more detail because that is important in Fiji. Number one, it's very vital for international and domestic passenger travel. I think that is the main transport mode for the sea-locked country, naturally. And also, it's also important for international fresh cargo. There are some exports like fruits and tuna fish for the major market. So that's also important. The Fiji have 15 airports, but most of them are domestic. So we have only 2 international airports. And in 2019 in Tropic, the composition is like 1/4 is domestic, 30% Australia, and 18% in New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand are the major countries which send the travelers and tourists to Fiji. So those are the important, and that is relevant for the economic recovery from the COVID. So that's important fact. And also the Fiji is the hub in the South Pacific. So it is connected with the neighboring countries. So the other Pacific Island nation, 11% is also important. So we have dozens of island countries in the South Pacific, and actually some of the neighboring countries are not connected by air. So they need to come to the Fiji and then moving to the another neighboring country. So it is working as a hub, and other countries are connected with a spoke. One of the important infrastructure in the air transport is the Nandi International Airport. That is the one big international airport that handles most of the international air traffic. So we have 2 million international and 300,000 domestic passengers in usual year. But nowadays we don't have much international passengers, and that we will touch upon as a pandemic situation. And also, if we see this bar chart, you can see steady growth after 2019, but obviously in 2020, it's dropped dramatically. And also this steady growth supported the tourism industry and also overall economy. Next slide, please. For the maritime transport, it's also vital for international and domestic cargo and domestic passenger travel. For the air, I emphasize the passengers, but for the maritime transport, it's more important for cargo, obviously, and that is a cheaper way to move the goods. It is also important for domestic passenger travel. I mentioned that we have 110 inhabited islands, and some of the major ones are connected through the air, but it's quite expensive for the most of the citizens here. So many of the locals are moving around with a domestic ship. That takes a long time, but it's much, much cheaper. We have 2 international ports and 3 private-owned ports and 40 small island wharfs and jetties. And most domestic vessels leave from Lautoka, that is close to Nandi International Airport, I mentioned, and also the Suva. Then the important fact for this maritime transport is that the most ferry routes are serviced by the private companies, and they are profitable business actually. Much smaller islands, the government service the ferry services, basically subsidizing those islands just to support the lifelines. So that's the maritime transport. So next slide, please. And also I want to emphasize the importance of the tourism in this country. Few important facts. Tourism receipts amount to 40% of the GDP. So half of the GDP in monetary values come from the tourism. It employs 150,000 people directly in the hotel and indirectly like a catering and transport for the tourism. So this is a country with less than 1 million population. So 150,000 people is really, really important. We have 900,000 visitors in 2019, and around half come from the Australia. And as I said, for the air services, high dependence on air transport is an important fact. As I said, most of the tourists coming from outside of the country by air, and because the domestic market is very limited. So the tourism is important, and for the tourism, the critical air transport is the air service. So what is important for the economic recovery is how to recover or resume the air services safely. So that's the tourism. Thank you very much. So we talk about now the COVID-19 pandemic. So what happens? In like many other countries, we faced this crisis in the end of the March. So on 26th March, all the borders are closed. And then at this moment, only citizens and the residents may enter with strict control. Nandi International Airport, our main international gateway, is closed immediately on 26th March. And local passenger and the ferry travels also ceased on 29th March. So in the very beginning, the government took a very decisive and very strong actions to close the borders. This is very similar to the Bhutan's case. The Fiji is a very small country and the medical facilities are very limited. So the government understandably worried about the pandemic and the outbreak in the country. Simply that medical facilities doesn't have capacity to handle the outbreak. So the government decided closed all the border while they recognize the economic cost, but they think that the health implication is much more severe. So they shut down the whole international connection in the very beginning of the pandemic. Although that's applied to the passenger services, but the international and domestic cargo movement continues on a regular but less frequent basis. As I said, Fiji depends on the international import and also the export. And without import, country cannot really sustain. The basic foods, fuels, some of the supplies, even the medical goods, they all depend on the international cargoes. So they continue that with very strict control. And basically they minimize the human-to-human contact for those cargo shipping. And what I want to emphasize for this Fiji's case and also relevant for the Indonesian case is that it is relatively easy to control the border and contain the pandemic in sea-locked countries. Probably it's applied to many islands in Indonesia. Why? Because there are very limited number of points of entry. So international airport, international seaports, we have 2 each only in Fiji. So if we control that point of entry, basically airport and the seaport, and make sure that nobody will coming in, or if they coming under the strict control by the Ministry of Health and also the quarantine officials, then we can really avoid the entry of the virus. So it's relatively easy. And Fiji, in that sense, was very successful. To date, we had only 32 confirmed cases, only 2 deaths. And they are all imported from the outside of the country. And so there is no community transmissions. So government was very successful to contain the pandemic. As a matter of fact, we don't have any active cases now in Fiji. So government declares that Fiji is now COVID-free. So most of the restrictions, like number of persons who can get together, some of the gathering parties, bars and restaurants, many restrictions were imposed in the beginning, but most of them are lifted now. And offices are open, and actually ADB's Fiji office open, and I'm talking from the office. So that is very successful, but actually the negative side is that the economic impact is very large because the strict border control means that there is no international travelers coming in. So that's really damaged the economy. That is the next slide. So please move on. Thank you very much. So the economic impact you can see in this slide. In 2020, we expect a 20% economy contraction. We usually have 4% economic growth in Fiji, but we expect very severe contraction. And also, we expect that a large number of layoff and unemployment, and also the public debt accordingly increase because the government increased the fiscal expenditures and the deficit is widening. And this is the direct in the result of the border closure and also the restrictions of the air services and the mobility. Thank you. Next, please. Next slide, please. So the government is now thinking how to resume the transport services, and that is critical for the tourism and critical for the overall economy. Number one, domestic inter-island passenger services resumed on 26 April, so relatively early stage. So that domestically, because the government was successful to contain the COVID, they opened all the air and also sea travels early stage domestically. But international passenger services, both air and the sea, remain suspended at this moment. In addition to the air services, there are sizable cruise ship travels in Fiji, and that's also suspended. And this continues still now, and that have a very severe impact on the economy. And as I said, domestic and international cargo service continue to operate because that is very important for the people's life. Next slide, please. Then the travel bubble, maybe some of you heard about it, and I think some of the countries, including Indonesia, like a Bali tourism destination, talk about the travel bubble. So the Fiji is one of the countries who try to achieve this now. So what is a travel bubble? So that is a special agreement to open borders with specific partner countries under the specific protocol. So this is a safely open the borders, but in a very special condition. So that allows a quarantine-free entry. That is very critical for the tourists because they don't want to spend 2 weeks in a quarantine facility. And they impose the health protocol in airport, airlines, land transport, test and tracing, hotels. So they have a series of protocols and the guidelines, and they allow the entry only following these specific protocols. And also this applies only with the specific partner countries, and usually this works only between the countries which have a low and a comparable infection risks. Otherwise, the countries with lower risk profile doesn't want to open the border. And this has been discussed so much, but it's not really happening in many countries in practice because this is difficult. This requires a very close coordination among the various ministries, Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, border control, sometimes armies. So the inter-ministry coordination is very difficult. And also the private industries, hotels, air services, those need to be coordinated. So it's very difficult. For the case of Fiji, they consider the travel bubble with New Zealand and Australia because they are the tourism source country, and also the Pacific Island nations. That was announced some months ago, but it's not really happened yet. Because in the beginning, Australia and New Zealand were regarded as a successful countries to contain the COVID. But after that, the Australia's outbreak happens, and the New Zealand also, unfortunately, happened the local transmissions. So they gave up at this moment, and then they continued again further on how we can do this travel bubble. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I don't know, somehow we have a lot of red arrows. And also we talk about the blue lanes and the other initiative. Blue lanes is one of the successful measures that was introduced already. Air services is very difficult still, but the government allows the yacht to come to Fiji. Some of the yacht is kind of very big, owned by the billionaires. And the logic behind this is that they come to Fiji by sea, and sometimes, or most of the cases, it took more than 14 days. So in a yacht, it can be regarded as a kind of self-quarantine. And before going on board, they will have the test and show the negative results. And then the kind of the sea travel to Fiji is regarded as the quarantine period. So upon the arrival, they will do the check again, but they don't have to 14 days quarantine upon arrival in Fiji. And this is so far successful, and the 70 plus yachts come to Fiji, and that's produced employment and economic activities. And also the other entities are very active to produce and prepare for the future border opening. So the Fiji Airway is the airline companies, and they prepare the so-called travel ready to set all the guidelines. And also they launched the Care Fiji commitment by the Tourism Fiji. That is the tourism associations, and that's provide general guidelines and also the training for the tourism industry. So they are preparing using to some extent for the blue lanes, and also they are preparing for the future border opening through the air services. Right, next slide, please. Sorry, it's getting a bit too long, but this is the last slide. So what ADB is doing for now? So ADB support for better mobilities, as you can imagine, our usual way to support is the financial support and lending for the critical infrastructure. So we do road, we have a seaport, we have an airport, and those. And also we do have a technical assistance for analytical work, policy formulations, capacity development, innovations, those are technical assistance is also ongoing. And one of the example for this case of the safely start travel and the tourism under the COVID, this is one example what we do in Fiji. So we produce the general guideline and the best practices for public and the private stakeholders. So we have various guidelines and the operation protocols for the government agencies and also the private industries. So we come up with a set of the general guidelines so that they can modify and use it for their industries. We also directly advise the airport, that's a critical international airport, how to manage the international passengers with different COVID risk profile. So basically they need to segregate the passengers from different countries because the risk profile and the COVID infection risk is different. So we will segregate, and this airport need to reconfigure their the travelers' flows. And there are small fit out is necessary. And also we develop and deliver the training for the hotels and the accommodations and the for the hygiene and also social distance and deeper cleaning. So those are the works that we are doing in Fiji. And then lastly, we are also supporting and also the preparing financial support for the infrastructures and also the transport operators because they are very critical and they are in a difficult situation, the liquidities. So this is the ADB's support, and this is the end of my presentations, and we will return the floor to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masa, for your very insightful presentations. There's a lot of lessons, I think, for Indonesian counterparts here. And that's, because like Fiji, Indonesia, especially maybe Bali, is dependent on tourism and maybe also to a certain degree dependent on Australian tourism. And there's, a visible number of Australian presence in tourism and as well as businesses in these areas. And I think, the discussion will dig deeper into what, how both Indonesia and Fiji can probably survive this, tourism industry can survive this pandemic, so that as soon as the, a safe and a reliable vaccine comes around, hopefully, we can see a rebound. But I would like to hear first from our discussant. First, we have Professor Erika Bukhari from Universitas Sriwijaya. Please, Ibu, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Please unmute, Bu.
Sorry. Thank you, Mas Koko. Thank you, Mr. Masayuki. It's very interesting, Your presentation is very interesting, and success for your travel bubble and Blue Land, right? We can learn from this situation. We can share, maybe compare with Indonesian case. Yeah, I would like to ask you, maybe later, where we all have suffered from the COVID-19, as it was mentioned that you mentioned that after the border closure, the forecasted of GDP down to minus 19.8% in 2020. So, okay, sorry, process. Okay, so this happened also in Indonesia. We also suffer between January to April, $4 million has lost from this tourism, and more than 2,000 hotels and more than 8,000 restaurants are closed, or we lost 30 trillion for hotels and nearly 40 trillion for restaurants. It is enormous hit for tourism, especially as you know, as you mentioned that Bali is 4 times bigger than Fiji, but we have Indonesian-wide maybe more than there are more than that. So we have 15 million people lost their job. Compared to you is 550 million. No, 50,000. So this is a very big hit for us, actually. So from realizing from the health protocol, at least 50% passenger trips have been reduced. This only for protocol, but other restraint are visa to enter other country. We have also blocked by some countries not to get a visa nowadays. So people also have the scaredness to use river and sea transport. They don't want to use this because they are afraid to get COVID from other passenger. So even though the health protocol have been implemented in many public transport, but we realized that some flight didn't really obey that. They still use all the seat. There is no seat between that, so it's okay. Now we suffer another thing. Indonesia hinterland connection mostly good, but from activity of freight transport, we can see the movement of the freight transport. The restraints are on the delay because of the public transport, from the protocol and checking, control, queuing. So this is the problem. So, and from the imported goods, which is still not normal, depends on the international cargo policy. This is not easy for us. For example, discussion here, I'm interested in the word from Mr. Bambang at the beginning. So what will be in the new normal? So basic need of people is food. We cannot force people to do to take leisure time to Bali, to use tourism promotion, which is very cheap now. Maybe we cannot force that, but people start to take leisure time for eating out again. Now hotel and restaurants are raising back to normal. Food and food supply chain is getting back to normal, but international relation is still not normal. Some countries still don't give visa, so that international business trips are disturbed. This is the problem. But what next? Health protocols is very important. So if we see people in the restaurant, now they sit close together, not wearing masks, and compared to the result, it is increased. I mean, more and more area get COVID, black or not red or anymore, but it is black zone because of this situation in our area. So the most important thing to welcome this new normal is not back to normal again. So we have to go to new normal, which is very restricted. So this is very important for all of aspect. Otherwise, we will go back to zero. Okay, that's all, Mr.
Right.
Coco. Maybe I've
Thank you.
all my time. Thank
No,
you.
that's fine, Prof. Erica, and it is indeed, you know, the question that we are so desperate to answer, right? How do we get out of this you know, pandemic, in this recession? What will the next new normal look like? And you know, it's probably not so easy for industries who are high touch, right? For example, like food and beverages and also tourism. Now, before I let Masayuki to answer, I would like to also invite the second discussant, Mas Ibrahim. Please, Mas, and please unmute as well.
Thank you very much, Mas Coco. Thank you very much, ADB MTI, for this wonderful opportunity. As tourism has been discussed by Professor Erica before, my comments on Dr. Tachiri paper will be revolving around the maritime transportations, also concerning my background as a maritime economist. So there are two slides which is mentioned in the presentation of Dr. Tachiri, that Fiji puts a lot of importance on the role of international and domestic cargo, and that's why they have two international ports, and the disruption during COVID has been unprecedented, like in other places as well. So Dr. Tachiri also mentioned that land transportations comprise about 30%, whereas air and maritime transport are the most important in Fiji, as the country is a sea-lock country. So maybe first of all, the problem of Fiji, and by the way, Fiji is, or Indonesia is about 200 times larger than Fiji with regards to the size of the economy. And Indonesia is about 100,000 times bigger with regards to size. So there are many similarities for sure, but also we have to escalate the lesson learned from Fiji to be used and to be more fruitful in the discussion of Indonesia and beyond. So as we already know that actually WTO has been predicting things will be going from bad to worse if the COVID pandemic has not been resolved by the end of the year. You know, anticipating the drop in domestic trade by 13 to 25%, and Indonesia is for sure not immune by the pandemic, as we have been experiencing drops since the first quarter of 2020. Yeah, February 2020 was the massive drop with regards to trade container trade volume. We were also forced as maritime operators to use the more expensive bunker since January 2020. But then we just realized that the heating factor is not concerning bunker, as bunker is actually declining massively during the first quarter of 2020, but rather than the declining in demand, as you know, everybody is busy to mitigate, to contain COVID in each country. So as a result, a maritime economy or container shipping in particular has been, you know, in itself has been declining since 2013, and it is even more worse now by the shrinkage in demand and, you know, shortage in the supply. What's happening? Because, you know, big companies are trying to, we call it blank sailing activities. They tend to reduce the supply in such a way that the freight rate will be very expensive. Nowadays, currently, if we are discussing with exporters in Indonesia as of today, we find it difficulties to export our commodities because of the capacity constraint from the supply side. So not that we couldn't export, the commodities are ready to go, but as of now, the limitation of boxes and the increasing of freight rates, you know, the freight to China usually only $50 per box. Now it hits 150. So Indonesia's majority primary exporters commodities, and with the hit of the freight rate due to the capacity constraint, and it will be huge blows for the domestic exporters or Indonesia exporters, mainly using FOB to export their commodities out. And then In the same time, big carriers are getting more because they enjoy the increment in freight rate. So the smaller carriers like regional carriers in Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, we are experiencing drop in both revenue, for instance, in general. Some of them, they are performing better, but the bigger one like Marsline or Costco, they're enjoying a rapid increment as they are bigger player. So the question for Dr. Tachiri, does Fiji have any experience concerning delay in goods importations and exportations? As we know, goods out from Fiji, primarily sugar, garment, gold, timber, and then commodity imported in were primarily machinery and equipment. So do you experience any delay in the exportations, and how the government mitigate the problem if there are any? Second of all, if we look into Indonesian position in the maritime sector, as we see here that the role of in maritime economy has been very important, maybe as similar as Fiji as well. The cost of transportation comprise about 25%, Dr. Tachiri, for all current account deficits. So it means that if country like Indonesia can tackle the problem of exportations of our own goods, then actually we can reduce the reserve out to pay the transportation costs. Yeah. So this is very important to realize. We are talking much about current account deficit. Little did we know that actually maritime is one of the remedy to tackle the problem. And as we mentioned, Indonesia is by any means immune to the global shock denoted by the drop in both export and import, and both concerning oil and gas and non-oil and gas. And then there will be a long road to recovery as predicted by many data analysts and as well international organizations. 2020 will be hitting the rock bottom of the all volume with regards to all trades, and then road freights, tonnage, and then rail freight, as well as the air freight. So everything is impacted a lot by the COVID. As we can see here, the drop of the throughput, the throughput of Tanjung Priok can be -5%. I think never happened in Indonesia. We experienced drop in cargo as big as -5%. Usually we have 3% on average during the last 10 years or so. So of course, Indonesia is much bigger than Fiji, but maybe there will be some lesson learned how to mitigate the forecasted decline in the cargo, whereas cargo has direct and indirect linkage to other sectors as well. Of course, we cannot see logistic and transportation in isolation. There are also warehousing, there are also tracking, there are also drivers, container operators, and many backward and forward linkage to other sector as well. As we know, in Indonesia, we are experiencing decline in pretty much all destinations of exports and on imports. So maybe Fiji has the same experience, and how government tries to handle the situation of dropping in the value of export and imports. Lastly, as we also know that currently there are recoveries of domestic cargo in Indonesia, as we are comprising about 16 islands, 5 or 6 major islands in Indonesia, but still it will take some time to be fully recovered by the end of December. And at the same time, there will be some shocks and pressure for transportations companies and operators, as they have to reduce the capacity and the frequency of operations. So, as we also see by the end of second quarter 2020, Central Statistic has released the transportation is the major hit of sector in Indonesia, declined by almost 30%. Of course, not all transportation is there. It's more air freight and air operators, aviations, rather than inland transport and marine, but still it is transportations in the economic classifications. So, and as well during the pandemic, as also Professor Erika mentions, sectors are catching into an attempt to achieve the break-even point, and then the break-even point becomes a bit bigger now because they have to cover the fixed costs and sunk costs in operations. If we see other data in infrastructure, the positive cash flow is now going backward about 3 to 4%. Usually infrastructure will return to positive break-even point by a 5th or a 6th year. Now we are pushed back or pushed forward to 10 years. So it's really challenging for investment. And I mean, and does Fiji also experience same thing, and how the government mitigate the problem? So to end, question for Dr. Tachiri will be, what government intervention have been implemented in Fiji, both for demand? Do you have any universal cash transfers, for instance, to maintain the purchasing power of citizens? Or supply side, do you have any company subsidies, SME subsidies, tourism subsidies, such way that even to hotels and restaurants are zero accepting guests, but things can still be maintained at operational level? As well, the second questions will be more general for ADB, as the challenge in maritime and transport has been very big and challenging, especially for regional operators. Does ADB has specific policies? Yeah, you mentioned there are some policies and strategies with regards to infrastructure, but specifically on maritime transportation, do you have any specific advocations, yeah, to support local and regional players? Thank you very much, Mas Koko. Back to you as moderators. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Ibrahim. So, Masa, we were lucky to have Mas Ibrahim here, and the question is really, you know, how do the Fiji government, and I'm sensitive that you're not the government, but you probably know more about this more than anybody else, about how they are dealing with the sluggish demand, and also on the supply side, how do the government keep the industry at least afloat until demand can start pouring back in, well, hopefully from Australia by the time. So Masa, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very good insightful questions and the comments. Let me start from the points and the comments from the Professor Erika Puhali. And I agree, this is the very important point, what is the new normal? And my answer is I don't know about it, but I agree that the new normal will not be the same as the old normal. So we will not really go back to the pre-pandemic world. And so the tourism and the transport, that demand may not recover completely. So that's maybe one issue, how we can cope with. And I don't have much answers, but what we discuss in ADB in particular is that many economists simply recommend, okay, well, you depends on the tourism too much. So why don't you diversify and reduce the risk? But it's not very easy for small island like Fiji, which doesn't have much resources and the competitive advantage. And that is probably the same for islands in Indonesia. Diversifying the economy, finding other industry other than tourism is very difficult. So this is one thing that we need to think further. And also as you pointed out, in addition to the protocols and the visas, the people's sentiments and thinking is also matters for that. And I don't have much clear solutions and answer for that. But I think we means the government and also the development partners start thinking on how to mitigate, how to move to the new situation with minimum cost. So that's my comments. And also move on to the Dr. Ibrahim Rohman's comment. Thank you very much, very thorough comments and analysis. That's very educating for me. The first question was about the delay in the import and export in Fiji. For Fiji, first of all, export is very small and it's just negligible for this economy. Well, we do export a Fiji water, but this really doesn't help the whole economy. It's very limited. But important for the import, and because we rely on the basic goods and the foods and the fuels for the imports. And I think that fortunately the impact so far are quite limited. They're not the hugely disruptive delay. So basic foods and the fuels keep coming. I observe there are small kind of a shortage of like a medical goods, for example. It happens. And as you pointed out, some of the transport cost increase that happens in Fiji. And I think the impact is greater in the small country like Fiji, because the large countries have a large port. So you have the large ships, big tankers, big container ship. But in a small countries, small port, they accommodate only small ships. So the transport cost is relatively higher, and they don't have much negotiating power against those big, large shipping company. I don't have a data, but I can imagine easily this transport cost issue is greater in small countries, and it's more prominent in this kind of environment. So maybe that is a very important point, and it's worth studying further in this small economy. And the second question is about the general government support for demand and the supply side. For the demand, the government has a massive tax cut in various industries. So that will create the stimulate the economy. They have a big unemployment benefit. So the most of the people in the tourism industry, hotels and the restaurant, they are unemployed, but they still get the money equivalent to the original salary. Well, actually, it's partially subsidized from the budget, and partially it's the withdrawal from their pension fund. So it's their own money, but they are allowed to withdraw temporarily so that they have an income. For the lower income group, those are subsidized by the government. So that is lift the demand in the economy. That is really helpful, but what we are discussing now with the government is that it's not very sustainable. It has a massive fiscal implications and the government borrowing for that. But if this crisis continues half a year more, even the 1 year, 2 years, I think a fiscal space is getting very limited, and we start worrying about the debt sustainability of the government. So I'm a bit worried about the midterm sustainability of this government stimulus package. And for the supply side, there are some SMEs, including the tourism industries, hotels and tourism, the restaurants, and the government has general guidance for the commercial banks to introduce the repayment debt moratorium. So the interest payment and the Christmas payment is kind of suspended now. Right. So that helps the many industries. But again, on the same issues, if we continue, that will have the pressures to the financial institutions eventually. And so how long government and the banks can continue this? That is a big question for the supply side issues. And also the government have some support to reskill the people, give the training for example, the people in the hotel industry, they don't have a job, so government provides some training so that they can shift to the different industry to do other jobs, maybe computers and officials. But this is also limited, to be frank, because the general economy is not really growing so fast. And so other industries, how much absorb, that is a good question. So that is the big difficulties. So those are the questions, I believe, and I'm happy to answer further if you have questions. Thank you.
So I would like to take the privilege as the moderator to ask this question then. You mentioned about the dependence on Australian tourism. Has there any plans to enter into like a travel bubble arrangements or other negotiations, health protocols, or what have you? With your largest tourism market, and maybe that's something that we all can learn. Especially for those in tourism dependent economies, well, such as some of the provinces in Indonesia. Masa. Yeah.
Australia and also the New Zealand. That's also important. That's right. For the Fiji, there are some discussions. There are very high-level, political level discussions between ministers and the prime ministers about it. There are some limited scale of the more working level discussions. What is the actual protocols and what is the gaps to fill? But it's not really moving fast enough at this moment. In particular, because of the Australia, as you know, they do have their own problem in domestically. Well, even each state in Australia closed the borders actually. So, and Australia is now focusing on to resolve that issue, and I think that's the number one. And because without that, even the Fiji government and also the Fiji citizens will be a bit worried about to invite the Australian citizens because they have a higher risk. I believe there are more chance for the New Zealand because they are more successful to contain the local cases. And I think it's probably the same for case of Indonesia. Probably the government is more willing to open the border with the countries which is more successful and to contain the COVID. So, so there are some discussions, also the New Zealand for the case of Fiji, but at this moment, the very detailed protocols, agreement, negotiation, it has not yet completed yet.
Well, such a negotiation cannot come by sooner for those in the tourism industry. And there's another question here from Andro, who, in my understanding, is enjoying life in one of the islands in Eastern Indonesia. Hi, Andro. So does the domestic traveler in Fiji require any rapid testing or PCR test before flying or sailing? Is it free of charge for the travelers, or is it included in the airfare? And keeping in mind that you did mention there's only 32 cases and there's no community 2 fatalities virtual zero community transmissions. But what sort of health protocols in place or any symptom surveillance that you have in place, if I may add to Andrew's question, for this domestic travelers, Masa?
Yeah, for the domestic travels, it is not required to do the PCR test. There are some very basic temperature check and some health surveillance, but there is no serious PCR test at this moment, domestic for travelers.
Well, thank you so much for your presentations, Masa. And I think we are already 12 minutes over time, but it's a very delightful presentation, and it's been a very insightful 2 hours, and I thank everybody for participating. Earlier we had close to 350 participants, so that's a good number. Before I yield my time back to Chai, the MC for today, please don't forget in the chat box to fill in sign up for the e-certificates will be issued jointly by MTI and FSTPT. And we will also arrange to distribute the materials presented today to your emails, probably with a Google Drive link or something similar. And it is my honor and pleasure to be co-hosting this event with ADB and FSTPT. So, and I hope for future, more engagement, future collaboration. As apparent in this discussion today, there are more questions than answers at this point. And I think that is really an opportunity for us in development experts to think, outside the box, and be creative in how to find a solution to this, once in a generation pandemic. And with that, I yield my time back to Chai.
Thank you, Pak Koko. I think the pleasure is ours in ADB that we can have this very fruitful and lively discussion with all the experts here. And I agree that this second session really concludes the webinar in a very high note, and I hope everyone doesn't mind that we have this slight delay in wrapping this up. So please join me to thank and give a big round of applause to all the speakers, to all the discussants, and the great moderators. And I hope you all gain valuable insights from the presentation and discussions as much as I do. And with that, please fill the form as Coco has suggested. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next webinar discussion. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mas Chai.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Masa James, Mbak Dini.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Supaya dari seluruh mata kuliah.